we have a question from Mary today. That's a good one. She said, I've been doing a lot of watercolor painting lately, and it feels like I've forgotten how to apply acrylic paint. You haven't, but I totally understand what you mean. Can you give an overview for painting faces in acrylic without leaving brushstrokes and hard edges? Do you recommend a retarder to help with blending? I can't figure out if I'm using too much water or not enough paint on my brush, and I'm not sure which brush to use. Any resources would be appreciated. Thank you. Lots of questions there. So why don't we start with applying acrylic paint? There are so many different ways to use acrylic, and it really kind of depends on your approach, Mary. So I'm going to kind of talk you through mine and then give you different options for blending for you to think about. So I do an underpainting in acrylic where it's usually some kind of monochrome, which means, from white to black, or white to the darkest color of the color I've selected. So I usually use like a raw umber for my underpainting, and then I might add white for the highlights. And I lay my whole painting out this way so that the darks that are visible are probably going to be the darks that remain visible as I add skin tone. And because I do this layering, then it's kind of like I am coloring in different gradations of skin tone, and I scumble. So scumbling is when you use a brush that's very dry. It has almost no water on it, and it has paint on it, and you kind of rub it into the surface of the canvas. And I scumble so that it creates a texture where it creates a transition between the lights and darks, because there's kind of canvas showing through the paint, because it's not just this thick, even brush stroke. So scumbling, I'm going to spell that out and put it in the chat roll too, in case this is a new technique to you guys. Scumbling is something I use a lot with acrylic paint because it helps me create softer transitions between tones, between different colors. And I find that that works really well when I have multiple dry layers that I'm building on top of. The other way I work is, I haven't bought Retarder in a while, but you can mix Retarder, or you learn to mix really quickly while the paint is still wet. And sometimes that's how I do it. I am slowly transitioning to Golden Paint's slow drying acrylics because I've decided I'd like a little bit of a slower drying time, and I like their texture. They're a little more oil paint-like in terms of their texture. So I'm not using that with all of my paint yet, because I'm going to use up whatever colors I have and then buy and replace with the slow drying. But you can mix the slow drying with regular acrylic. Golden says that's not a problem. And then that just kind of changes the drying time a little bit for your paint that has the normal drying time for acrylic. Retarder is completely fine to use. You just need to make sure it's no more than a 50-50 ratio, no more than 1-to-1. You really want the retarder to be kind of 40% or less of your pigment, because otherwise it can start to change the transparency or opacity of the paint you've selected, and it can change the color. It could start to make it a tint and act like it's white, even though it's not a white paint. So I do think in general, you've got kind of using Retarder to help you create transitions. And I do find that already having my darkest darks, and sometimes even my highest, strongest highlights already painted on the painting, and then only worrying about the middle tone transitions. And of course I say only, but it kind of narrows your focus because you already know you have your strongest light and strongest dark. So then you're kind of focused on those in-betweens. So it is harder with acrylics for some people. I guess in some ways I treat it almost a little bit like watercolor, in that you have lots of drying layers and you kind of let them dry before you add new colors on top. But I find scumbling to be really effective, though I will say someone at my opening at the exhibition said, why don't you use oils? It allows you to have such softer transitions for skin tone and whatnot. And then she kind of had a caveat and was like, though I think you've handled it really well with the acrylic. And for me, I need a fast drying time. so that I don't think too much, because it is in my nature to overthink what I do and then overwork the painting. So for years, I've needed just the normal quick drying time of acrylic, because then I try to do it really fast. And if it doesn't work, it dries. And then I paint over it and I try again. Now I would like a little more time to work with. And so instead of going back to oils, which I'm not sure I want to do, I don't want the cleanup and the environmental kind of like the towels possibly, setting fire randomly and things like that because of using mineral spirits and linseed oil. So that's just my thing. I don't want to deal with any of that. So I'm going to try the slow drying acrylic. And so far it seems to be meeting my need. So that's a retarder would offer the same kind of opportunity to use the paints you already have and help with blending. And then in terms of water on your brush, there's some philosophy that if you have too much of a watered down acrylic on your base, that over time that's going to actually make your painting not last as long, and that it's better to mix the acrylic with some kind of medium instead of too much water when you're doing kind of first layers. I've worked watery before with acrylic. I really think it depends on your style and your interest and what kind of effects you're looking for. Usually when I am working on skin tones and putting in hair and facial features and just kind of layering in the skin, I do have a wet brush, but it's not sopping wet, but it's moist. I like to have a lot more paint than water when I'm really kind of committing to the layers of different paint. Usually, traditionally, I would work more wet for the starting layers because it was kind of loose and quick. But now I'm adding more paint than water in that situation as well, from reading about the kind of aging effects that it might have to have too much water as your bottom layer of acrylic. Brushes. I think the brushes, it depends on your preference again. I personally really like working with a filbert. The filberts have kind of a rounded tip, right? So instead of being, I don't have brushes with me up here in my office, but instead of having like a paintbrush where the tip is kind of square and flat, it's tapered, right? So it kind of has like this U shape. And I like that because I can kind of turn it to get soft edges. I think it scumbles nicely. And I do think a stiff bristle brush is really important for scumbling. So if all of your brushes are really soft, because you do kind of a lot of watercolor work too, getting a couple stiff bristle brushes, maybe a round one and a filbert of some kind of medium size would help you with some of that scumbling and transition.